All right, it looks like most of the people that were in the waiting room have come in, so we're going to get started on our webinar. So I want to welcome everybody for joining us this afternoon. My name is Dan Gold, and I have the privilege of serving as the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation Chair Executive Director here at the Hillel at UCLA. Today's webinar is an opportunity for our Hillel, for our student leaders, and some of our staff to share with parents, both of current students and incoming students, as well as alumni, of some reflections on the year. I think it goes without saying that it's been a challenging year in many ways for our students. It's been a challenging year for all of us throughout the Jewish world, in particular for people on college campuses. And so we wanted to share some reflections on the year, share some insights, but also share some of the amazing things that we've done as a community, some of the incredible ways that we've come together, and the ways that we've shown strength as a community through Jewish joy, through Jewish celebrations, and all the different things that have gone on here at UCLA and really throughout campuses across the country. This is a webinar, of course, so we've enabled the Q&A option. We have the questions that people submitted to us when you registered, so we'll get to those as we go throughout this program. But if you do have a question, you can use the Q&A function on the screen at the bottom, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. This is also being recorded. We won't be publishing it anywhere, but just in case people that especially parents or incoming parents that would want to hear some of this information, we can provide the link to them. And then finally, you have closed captioning options. So if anybody that's hearing impaired or otherwise would want to use closed captioning, you can enable that yourself at the bottom of the screen. The program will be about an hour. We hope to keep it within the hour. We have a handful of things that we want to share, a handful of updates, and then, like I said, we'll get to Q&A as well. So once again, my name is Dan, and I have the privilege of leading the Hillel here at UCLA. And for those that maybe aren't so familiar, our Hillel is really the central hub, the central Jewish community center for students. We also serve as an umbrella over many other Jewish student clubs in the way that we function. So most of what we do is student-led. In fact, almost all the programs that we do for students are student-led, and you're going to hear about a lot of that later today. But I also have the opportunity, and all the staff that you're going to hear from, we have the opportunity of doing more than just overseeing student programming and helping students do Jewish life on campus. In particular, my role is also to be the liaison for the Jewish students with administration, with the Jewish community at large. And so a lot of what I can provide today is some of the conversations and some of the things that have been discussed over the course of the year in that role. Hillel at UCLA, of course, is not the only Jewish organization on campus. There are many others, and we do our best. And I think we do a pretty good job of working together on campus. And certainly the students that are here with us today and many others have the opportunity to do programs with all the different Jewish organizations that they would want, whether it's, once again, Shabbat, or whether it's holidays, cultural, or anything related to Israel as well. So I want to hop into our program. And first, I want to introduce the Director of Student Life here at our Hillel, Rabbi Toba. And so Rabbi Toba is going to give a little bit of an update on things from her perspective.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for making time for the call today. I know everybody has been invested and watching campus from the neighborhood, from afar over the course of this year. And you've seen all sorts of things on the news and the media. But I wanted to highlight a few things that we're working on for students that you may not have seen on social media, that you may not have seen on Fox News. And that is the true joy and the learning and the meaning that students make at Hillel. It is funny, but in the midst of all of the encampment drama and the stress that put on students at UCLA in the day-to-day, on some level, what we were doing at Hillel wasn't so different from what we would be doing at any other time. And my funniest example of that is that during the encampment, one of the things that students had to deal with were competing parties for Israel and supporting Israel and raising money for charity for Israel. And so while the outside world, it looks like there is drama and it looks like there's a lot of fear, what you don't see is the joy and the fun and the normal parts of college experiences that students are still having in spite of it all. As a student life team this year, our job is always and feels ever more important to create meaning in Jewish lives, to create community for students, to have classes, to have courses, to have meals, to celebrate our holidays together. Of course, this year it's become increasingly important as well to let students know that they're not alone and help them create spaces to be seen. A big part of what many students articulate feeling is the invisibility and the fear of being their true and full self on campus. And so we work hard at Hillel to create spaces where students feel safe being full extent of themselves and their full selves in all the many parts of their identity, and reminding them that not only are they supported by their friends at Hillel, but by the adults at Hillel and by the staff and faculty of UCLA. And so we have worked hard. Just today, for example, we had a lovely program where faculty bought coffee in our cafe for any students who are available to show up, just as a reminder that when you see faculty in encampments or you see student groups promoting something that feels difficult for us, that there are people that connect to us, there are people to support, and we're not alone. I think one of the most important things that we are able to do as Hillel to that end is really focusing on pluralism. That we are the only pluralistic institution for Jewish students on campus, which means that while we have wonderful, amazing partner organizations like Chabad, for example, that offers Jewish meaning and Jewish learning, we are the only ones who are able to offer Jewish and meaning and learning and groups and activities from a very progressive side of the Jewish spectrum. That has become increasingly important as the issue of Israel has divided our campus more and more. Students who have overlapping minority identities, students who identify as Jews of color, students who identify as LGBTQ have felt less comfortable in some of the spaces where they once felt really at home. And so as those spaces have felt more and more unsafe for students who identify as Zionist or students who love Israel in any way, we have worked hard to make sure that there are more and more spaces at Hillel devoted to those conversations and those groups. So for example, this weekend, our LGBTQ group is joining in the parade in WeHo, and we are just starting, just have a student coming into leadership who is starting an organization specifically for Jewish students of color by Jewish students of color. And those are some of the things that we're really able to offer. We also are able to offer students some elements of the conversation that they might not be able to find in other places. For example, we had a lunch a few weeks ago that I led as a Reform rabbi about why do Reform Jews support protesting, and how do we support protesting, and what's different about the protests of lately, and how can we understand and support protesting for public and positive change in the world, and make sense of the anti-Semitism and the hurt and the pain that the current protests are causing our community. So in addition to all of the Israel events and all of the things, we have so much to offer students: chances to connect, chances to camp, chances to be seen, chances to be them full selves, to talk about what's going on campus and the climate, or also to let it go and focus on their other priorities and the many other things going on in their lives.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Toba. We're obviously very, very lucky to have you on our team and leading our students. And Rabbi Toba has a team of 3 other professionals on the team. So our students are not only well supported, but we diversify and we get different professionals to help our students in any ways that they want to do programs. Another aspect of our student life team is the partnership that we have at Hillel with the Orthodox Union. and the program, the JLIC, which has been led for many years now by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan and his wife Sharona, who both work out of our Hillel and we have an incredible partnership with. And so we have the privilege of hearing from Rabbi Aryeh, and he's going to share some of his perspectives on not only what he's been up to, but some of the perspectives on that partnership. Rabbi Aryeh.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you, Rabbi Toba. It's an honor to be a part of this optimal team here. And I think, really what I want to highlight is that the things we know from watching the news and watching TikTok and watching Instagram are all true, or many of them are true, or at least half truths. But the things that we forget to talk about is that the fun is still alive, the joy is still alive, the wonderful optimal opportunities for our Jewish students here at UCLA from all kinds of backgrounds to have meaningful, powerful, and hopefully fun Jewish experience is very much still happening. And I think that's something that we kind of forget, but it's happening. And that's the blessing of our Hillels, that we are offering people things for what's good for them, where they're at. Just some highlights since Passover, which had an amazing Passover at Hillel, which we weren't able to really speak about because so much went on. But each meal at Hillel, there was over 150 students from various backgrounds coming to celebrate Passover. And then right afterwards, there was a Shabbat of Unity that was participatory between Hillel UCLA and many other campuses with 140 students from many backgrounds coming together. 2 weeks ago, there was a big pro-Israel BFI Shabbat with hundreds of students. This week, we know some students go away for the long weekend. Hillel, we celebrated Shabbat with them wherever they may have been Nevada or other states, right? We are still providing positive, optimal opportunities for people. That's number one. Number two is there is a growth mindset of people wanting to be involved in Judaism that we're really seeing now that I haven't seen in my years on campus. And I've been blessed to be here for nearly 2 decades now. People coming out of the woodwork, people saying, I want to identify as Jewish, I want to participate in the Jewish community. And Hillel, again, is a blessing that Hillel can be there for them wherever they may be at. And whether it's for some students who are grad students who really don't want to have fun on Monday through Friday, we've opened the building now on Sundays in a new way for them. Or it's people who are like, I really want to have fun on a Thursday night, but we now have our building is literally open now from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m., consistently offering opportunities. Whether it's students who are looking for a Jewish way to advance their career through our JMed program or our J-Law or Jew Law programs. There's so many avenues out there now, and it's a incredible blessing. And it's a testament to the leadership that our team, and especially Rabbi Toba and Dan, have had, which is that we're not going to back down or let the negativity create more negativity. We're going to do just the opposite. When there's negativity, we're going to create more optimal. And that's the blessing of this team. And I'm honored and inspired to be a part of this. And I look forward to finishing strong. A lot of times the last couple of weeks, no, we're going all the way to the end. And we're going to have an amazing next 2 weeks on campus, God willing. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Aryeh. As you can hear and can feel, we're very, very lucky to not only have Rabbi Aryeh and Sharona now, but for being part of our community for so long. It really makes the Jewish community at UCLA one of the best in the country, and it's because of the partnerships, it's because of the leadership, and it's because of the team that we have, and I certainly am lucky to work with every one of them. I also want to really quickly introduce somebody who's on our Zoom behind the scenes. Our Chief Development Officer, Rachel Petru, is here with us, and she's going to be helping as I go through some of my own reflections. She'll be helping put some resources in the chat for everybody, because I know especially the parents of either current or incoming students, there are some resources that will be helpful that I'll try to go through. And so I want to share a few reflections from my perspective now. I think most probably know, but I started in this job last May. So I've only been in this role for a year, a little bit over a year, but I was working in the Jewish community. I actually worked, for those that don't know, I worked at the Jewish Federation here in Los Angeles. So I'm very familiar with the local community, and I have been familiar with a lot of the ins and outs of what's been going on campus. The plan last spring was that our campus, the UCLA, which meant our Hillel, as well as members of the student life team, the administration, were going to be participants in a Hillel International program called the Campus Climate Initiative. And that program was for selected members of the administration to get intensive training on anti-Semitism and to help guide the campus through what we thought would be a normal year. As we all know, on October 7th, everything changed with the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel. And I think most of you all know that for us at UCLA, along with many other schools in the UC system, October 7th was like 4 days into school. So we didn't really have any student programming. We really didn't have any student experiences this year prior to October 7th, other ironically than Yom Kippur and some of the holidays. So for us, we were really thrown into a really tough, intense time. And when, those first few days after the attack were unfolding, at the beginning, of course, our main focus was supporting students. You're going to hear from some of the students in just a couple minutes, and not just the 3 students that are here, but many students, of course, have family, have friends, certainly have been to Israel. And so it was very difficult for us, all of us, even staff, in those first few weeks to just cope with what we were seeing, with what we were hearing. And then really, unfortunately, of course, almost immediately, we were simultaneously not only trying to process what was going on for the Jewish world and for Israel, but we were now facing anti-Israel protests that took on new meaning and honestly, unfortunately, were intensified from previous years and previous, let's say, seasons on different campuses. And that created shockwaves for the Jewish community. I mean, maybe some of us assumed that would happen, or maybe some knew that this would be occurring. But when you're in that moment, for the month of October and even parts of November, a lot of us and a lot of students were really kind of shocked to see anti-Israel protests in such close proximity to those attacks. So our Hillel did everything we could to shift our programming, as Rabbi Toba mentioned, to create safe spaces, to let the students tell us what they specifically wanted, what they were hearing from their peers and their colleagues. But I mentioned the Campus Climate Initiative because I just want to highlight that as something that was really important, not only for me as a leader, but also our Hillel, because we were able to have really open communication with many levels of the campus administration almost immediately after October 7th. And I'm not going to come on this Zoom and give you all the details of everything that I think they did right or that they did wrong. But I will say, and I know the students will have their own experience backing up the sentiment, at the very least, we had incredibly open dialogue all the way from people in student life up to the chancellor's office. So again, we have lots that we can criticize the administration on for different decisions along the last several months this year. And most of those criticisms, we and I have told them directly, but at the same time, we do have very, very open dialogue and open communication with them. The situation about anti-Semitism on campus, and this is a little bit of my own narrative, but the impact on students really comes down to what I would classify as being isolated and feeling alone. Now, again, our Hillel, it's an ironic thing to say because our Hillel's whole mission is to create community and help students feel part of something and together. But when they venture out into campus, the reports that I hear often from students about facing anti-Semitism comes down to that feeling of isolation. They might be in a classroom and a professor says something and they look around and they realize they're the only Jewish student or they're the only person who's willing to be proudly and openly Zionist, and they don't know who to turn to or what to say or what to do. It could be students, and you'll maybe hear from some examples in a little bit, students that are part of clubs, that are part of student government, where again, all of a sudden, kind of somewhat out of nowhere or in a shock to their system, they're being told they can't participate in something or their views don't matter or they can't join something simply because they identify or they're being accused of, I use that word, accused of being a Zionist. And so that isolation has had a profound challenge on students. And that was part of the way that we communicated our concerns, not only to the administration, but even to faculty as well, because it was, again, hard enough to be going through the trauma that we were going through. It was hard enough for our students to hear some of these chants and some of these demonstrations, albeit protected by law. It was still challenging. And then to feel alone. And the number of times that I heard students come to my office, and I know Rabbi Toba and Rabbi Ari and all of our student life team would hear students say, I'm just looking for somebody to tell me they hear me, that they understand me, that they empathize with me. And that was a real challenge. And really tragically and unfortunately and sadly, in some ways, that is the most, in my opinion, the most vile goal of the anti-Zionist movement on our campus, of the pro-Palestinian, whatever you want to call it, the anti-Israel movement. It is to non-normalize and to sideline Zionism. And so for our students that feel so connected to Israel, not all of them do, but most do. And even if they don't feel, that it's a huge part of their identity, just a part of who they are as a Jew, it became very, very challenging. We tried to do everything we could, not only to communicate to the concerns of students to administration, but also to provide students with the resources that they had to cope, to connect, and in any way they needed to respond to anything that they were facing. So first and foremost, UCLA has a robust mental health program. They have a counseling program that's available to students. Our Hillel is part of the Jewish Federation's Ezra network, which provides counseling and therapy for students that might need it. And so as well as the services that the university provides, we did everything we could. We brought therapists to Hillel. We continue to do that. And we also work directly with what's called CAPS, the counseling program here, to make sure that they were aware, and they did have special services, special opportunities for Jewish or Israeli students specifically to go and have somebody to talk to. Beyond that, when it comes to incidents of anti-Semitism, the most effective official thing that students are told to do, that we continue to tell them, is to report every incident to the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion here at UCLA, otherwise known as EDI. So we're going to share in the chat with you the link that we share with students where they can report any of those incidents that occur. And this is a situation where it would be a violation of a student's civil rights, right? Where they would be discriminated against, and they feel that they were discriminated against simply because they were Jewish or because they were a Zionist. The challenge with this, to be transparent, is that when a student does it, it becomes a formal report, and the transparency around those reports is often very limited. And so for students, back to this idea of feeling isolated, even if they report something very severe in a formal way, they weren't always hearing from people at the university about it afterwards. And this is one of the key critiques that I and Hillel have had with the university, is that they need to do a better job of, yes, protecting confidentiality of anything that's reported or being investigated, but that they need to be there for their students to show them warmth and to show them care, even if it is from a different department. And so, again, just to share with you the two sides of how things go on here on campus. As everything unfolded here at UCLA and other campuses across the country, protests, demonstrations, activism, as we've been talking about, and we know it kind of culminated really in the last couple months, especially here with the encampment that took over campus for about a week. Our Hillel, which primarily serves Jewish students, really started, as Rabbi Tova mentioned briefly, really started to also try to build community with faculty. Not only with faculty here at UCLA, not only with the Jewish faculty here at UCLA, but also reaching out to other faculty. And so we're doing that more and more because, of course, the faculty is such a big part of our school. With about 30,000 undergraduates and several thousand more graduate students, not to mention the medical school and the business school and the law school, there are many administrators, many staff, and many faculty. And so it's really important to be reaching out and connecting across the campus. In my opinion, the number one challenge that I said students face being isolated comes from the idea that the anti-Israel movement tries to create an environment that doesn't include Zionists. And so this idea of non-normalizing Jewish students is something that we are working with not only the administration, but we're trying to create partnerships to tackle. And so I have led a few initiatives across the campus with non-Jewish leadership, with administration. We did a Shine a Light on Anti-Semitism program over Hanukkah. We had an interfaith Passover Seder, and we've done many other programs. We had a dinner with administrators and the Hillel Board of Directors, really to try to break down these walls and these silos that exist. And all of that is not only to build community, but it's also to be a strong voice for the Jewish people, the Jewish students, and to kind of get past and combat this idea that, I'll say it the opposite. We're trying to normalize Zionism in the best way that we can. Really quickly, before I get to the students, a few words about the encampment that took place and what's been going on in the last couple of weeks, even including the chancellor testifying before Congress. So as we all know, right at the end of Passover, the anti-Israel movement in an attempt to strengthen how they were promoting their cause. They took to campus and they took over basically half of a quad of one of the main campuses, one of the main areas on campus. It's important to note, although it's somewhat of just a minor thing, that the encampment started with a permitted protest that, of course, they never left. And so a lot of people are talking about those first few hours and what the university could do. You know, it was very challenging, even though we knew where it was heading, and even though they were basically saying where it was heading, it was very challenging because there was a permit to protest that they then stayed. And so by staying, they took over that area of campus. That area expanded beyond the grass area and started to block different areas, different pathways, even certain entrances to buildings. And so our Hillel, with the backing of our students, really did everything we could to communicate to the university that while we don't like the message, most of us don't like the message of the encampment, we're really voicing our opposition and wanting action because of how many rules that the encampment broke and how it really disrupted not only the flow and the everyday activities of campus, but it went against every policy that every other student group, including our Jewish student groups, agreed to follow. And right, those policies were in place not only to protect and keep everybody safe, but to create equity and equality among the different student groups. And so while it did take a week and many things occurred in the week, both our community came together to rally, and there was some violent attacks on the campus, on the encampment, that were very unfortunate and wrong. And at the same time, we know that things from within the encampment were incredibly problematic, that there was lots of anti-Semitism, lots of anti-Semitic rhetoric, even if many people that joined the encampment believed they were doing so to make a statement to promote a cause. After that week, the university took action in partnership with the city and the county to bring in law enforcement and to take down the encampment, unfortunately, but by force. And since then, the university has instituted a new department of campus safety, which would oversee how policing and how other aspects of security are implemented on campus, admitting that there were many security failures over that week. And then, of course, the chancellor was called into front of Congress to answer some questions from some politicians about his and the university's actions as well. It's important to note that a long time before this, and even before October 7th, Chancellor Block has announced that he's retiring at the end of this academic year. So the chancellor only has about 32 more days on the job, and we'll find out in a couple weeks who the new chancellor is. And I want just everybody to know, whether you're the parent of an incoming student, you're an alum, or you're a parent of a current student, our Hillel and I personally will take these talking points and all these things that I'm saying to you on my agenda with whoever the new chancellor is. And that will demand that that chancellor protect Jewish students, that they stand up for the rights of Jewish students, and that they come up with a plan to figure out ways to solve some of these issues that isolate and non-normalize what it means to be a Zionist and a Jewish student on our campus. Those are my reflections on the year. Of course, I could get into a lot more detail of a lot more things, but I'll leave it at that for now. And really, I think the real reason you all are here is to hear some of those reflections from our students. And so we have 3 incredible students with us today, 2 in my office with me right now. And so first, I want to turn it over to Tikva Cohen. Tikva served as the student board president for Hillel last year. And of course, in her 4th year here on campus, she's stayed involved as a student leader, specifically been involved actually as a student representative on Hillel's formal board of directors. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tikva.
Thank you, Dan. Hi, everyone. So thank you to Dan and all of our staff for being here and all of you for joining us today. I just want to start by saying that I started UCLA in fall of 2020, which was during a very different disaster, which was COVID. And Hillel filled a gap for Jewish students on campus that was providing free meals and a place to socialize when it was really difficult to do that outdoors, and different things that Hillel did during a different time a few years ago at this point. And I see that happening again, and I've seen it happen over the last year, where Hillel knows exactly what to do to step up and fill that role that some students are missing, and especially now that Jewish students are dealing with so much on campus, Hillel has really stepped up to, again, provide additional meals and programming and a space for people to come and hang out and do their work and feel safe. And there's so many aspects of Hillel, not just that the staff are working so hard and that we have such an amazing student board and that we have all these different organizations, but we also have the building where people can come and a kosher kitchen. And so there's so many things that Hillel does for students already. And then when October 7th happened and everything this year, just continuing to step up and fill additional positions. And I know Gabby will talk about a lot of the events that we've had since October 7th. So I won't go into too much detail on that, but I think it's just really important to note that that Hillel, as Rabbi Toba mentioned, and as Rabbi Kaplan mentioned, really fills this role on campus of being a pluralistic space for Jewish students, and being a place that when you don't feel safe on campus, or you don't feel comfortable going to classes, or you don't have Wi-Fi in your apartment, or you don't whatever it is that you don't have, Hillel has that. Hillel has food, Hillel has Wi-Fi, and coffee bean and all of these different assets that we're so lucky to have. And I think it's just really important to note that that it's really a place where students, and I'll speak for myself, but I think I can speak for a lot of students, that we really do feel safe here, and we really do feel like the staff I see that the staff is working around the clock to support us and to make sure that we feel comfortable and we feel safe and that we're okay, and that we have mental health services, and that we have, anything that it is we need. I'm able to contact any one of our staff members, whatever time of day it may be, and I know someone will respond to me and help. And as Dan mentioned, really being in communication with the administration, which I don't think I ever thought that as a student with 35,000 undergrads, I would have a relationship with anyone in our administration. And as Hillel students, whether or not you're that involved, we actually do. And I see these administration, and I see Dan, and I see Rachel, and all of these staff members really interacting with our administration and having, a relationship that isn't just, I'm going to email you and you're going to read my email and, we'll pretend like everything is fine. It's really that there is a relationship there where everyone is working around the clock to support us and to make sure. And, not everyone feels safe all the time, and seeing an encampment on campus is really disheartening and really disgusting. And, I didn't spend much time on campus that week that it was there, but I spent a lot of time at Hillel because this is the place that I felt the most safe. And, my friends could be here and my roommates could be here, and I could do my Zoom classes and my midterms from here. And I think it's just, there's a lot of things that don't go so well. And, that's happened on many other campuses. And for a while, I thought UCLA was very lucky that we weren't dealing with, so much that was going on at different schools. And then we had our encampment, and I was like, oh, well, it's kind of as bad here as it is at many other schools. But Hillel and the Jewish community and the students really rallied together and united. And, we're doing the best that we can to support each other. And so I'm lucky to have served as president and be on the board of directors and really be a liaison between our staff and our students and our board of directors, and be able to express all the concerns that we have. And I really feel like Hillel is doing everything that they can to support us.
Thank you, Tikva. Next up is Gabby Lazare. Gabby is not only involved with Bruins for Israel, but also student government.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Tikva. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabby. I think Tikva really spoke on a few things that I wanted to touch on as well. That just like before October 7th, we had a bunch of different experiences on campus where we turned to Hillel, and Hillel really provided a safe space for us and a community for us. For me, most notably, I remember, I think it was 2020 when Gaza was throwing rockets into Israel. Bruins for Israel provided a safe space where students can just sit down and talk about their feelings and really like feel that they have a community on campus. And I know that's when I fell in love with Hillel, and I was like, okay, I'm going to start coming here every day because I found my people. And after October 7th, I really saw that same sentiment where there were places on campus that unfortunately ostracized me and I felt alienated. And so I started coming to Hillel every day before my classes, after my classes, even on days when I didn't have classes. This was the place where I knew, you know, I can come hang out with my friends. I can grab a free coffee. I can speak with some of the staff here, like Sarah and Sophie, and just have a good time and feel safe. And so for me, that was always really important. And I also made sure, you know, to bring my friends to Hillel too. And so now, you know, like the general idea is, oh, after October 7th, you know, people don't generally feel safe and maybe like they won't be on campus, but instead we actually saw the opposite effect where more and more students came to Hillel, which was honestly a very beautiful thing. And so some of the things that I wanted to touch on today were the events that Bruins for Israel created to ensure students feel safe and also that their voices are heard. And so some of the things we did was we created these safe space events where students can have free coffee and again, talk about how they feel and tell us what they need from us. And so we always had a great turnout there. We hosted a vigil to mourn the losses of the lives lost on October 7th. We also had a few speaker events. Specifically, we had Charlotte Korchak, who's a Stand With Us speaker. We had Ofli, which is a Nova survivor speaker, Suzanne Rado, who's a Holocaust survivor. And this week we actually have an event with Eli Zieler and Ella Sheni Kuzin, who is a Kibbutz Be'eri survivor. And then another event that we hosted on campus where we really made sure that students' voices were heard was our Israel rally, where we had over 300 attendees. And we also had speakers like Maya Bialik and Rick Spur, who's an assembly member in our district. And so I feel that that event really empowered students and motivated students and made us feel proud to be Jewish Zionists on campus. We also sent out multiple statements condemning violence on campus and just simply sharing our narrative. And I think one of the most important things that we did is we called out students to remove an anti-Semitic student government member that, you know, we're still working on that. And then lastly, last week we hosted our Israel week where we commemorated Yom HaZikaron, we celebrated Yom HaAtzmaut. We had a Sheshbesh event, which I actually brought my mom to, and she loved Hillel. She was like, wow, like this is your school. I need to come here every day. And so she had the best time here, which was amazing. And then we also hosted our Israel Shabbat and an Israel party. And then aside from that, just as Tikva mentioned, we're in constant communication with faculty, with regents, with administration. I know I can speak for myself. I always have meetings with our associate Vice Chancellor Mick DeLuca, who has been great and always helping students and making sure that we're okay and getting what we need. And then on the other side of things, I'm also on student government. And so after October 7th, it's just been a very challenging space to be in, specifically because Jewish students on student government were alienated and ostracized, and a lot of council members were just spewing very dangerous and hateful rhetoric. But we have spoken to advisors and we've been in constant contact with administration about how to alleviate this. And then also for this year, how to make sure that Jewish students on campus are represented. And so we have plans in the works to make sure that that happens. And then some of the other meetings we had were with the Vice Chancellor and the Chancellor, and we specifically asked them to create an anti-Semitism task force where students and professors can look into anti-Semitism on campus and find ways on how we can all deal with it together. But that's just a few of the things that we've done. I can honestly talk for hours. So I'll stop here and I'll answer any questions later on. But yeah, overall, I'm really grateful to have this specific space. I'm here every day, and also a huge thanks to Dan and Rabbi Toba. We're really lucky to have you guys.
Thank you, Gabby. Next up, Eli Sanchez, who's involved not only with Bruins for Israel, but a bunch of other initiatives on campus and with our Hillel.
Thank you, Dan. Hi, everyone. I'm Eli Sanchez. I was the finance director of Bruins for Israel this year. I will be one of the students carrying over Gabby's incredible leadership and leading BFI next year. I'd like to talk about our plans for next year. BFI's goals for next year center around events celebrating Israel's culture. We'll continue to provide a safe space for a community to be proudly pro-Israel. On top of this, we want to focus on outreach to share the amazing culture and innovations Israel has to offer with other communities. We plan to organize joint events and programs with other cultural clubs. A few members of BFI's board will be student leaders on UCLA's Perspectives trips this July that takes non-Jewish students to Israel. This trip is very important. It's a very important part of BFI's goal of outreach and building alliances with non-Jewish students and communities on campus. In fact, one non-Jewish student who's going on the trip is a proud Zionist and very pro-Israel and will be on BFI's board next year with the hope that he can provide a different perspective and help us connect to other non-Jewish students. Another way we're building connections to Israel and countering all the anti-Israel activities through initiatives that focus on Israeli tech. This is something that I'm very passionate about. I'm the UCLA campus director of a program called Startup Nation Mentorship that pairs non-Jewish student leaders with an Israeli mentor from the desired field. On top of this, at Hillel, Dan and I are working to create an innovation space to connect UCLA students to Israeli tech and entrepreneurship. We recently led a hackathon that brainstormed how to fight anti-Semitism through tech. We submitted our idea to the Adir Challenge global competition and won an honorable mention prize. And this summer, we will be connecting more of the Israeli tech companies and startups and having meetings to build connections for the next year. As you can see, we have so much planned. I can't wait to see all the amazing things in store for the future. I'm really, really happy to be a part of Hillel. It's the safest space for me on campus. It's where I found all my friends. And I'm really thankful for Rabbi Tova and Dan and everything that the staff does here.
Thank you, Eli, and of course, thanks to our students. As you can see, this is just a taste of not only the incredible leadership we have at Hillel, but hopefully everybody on this call and hearing what the students have to say. This is just a glimpse of the future leaders of our entire community, and so obviously we're in incredibly good hands. And I'm going to help do some Q&A with them from some of the questions that were submitted prior and some of the ones that have been just submitted as we've been talking. But the way that I want to kind of wrap up the presentation here is to kind of highlight some of the things that the students said and that I was sharing about this open dialogue. And not only, dialogue is not the answer. And I want to reiterate that we're aware that just talking, sometimes people say talk is cheap, but it is an important first step. And I look at some of the solutions that we're going to need to make on these campuses as really long-term solutions. But the only way we're even going to have a chance is to have this dialogue, to have these relationships. And not only do we have that with the administration here for the most part, but the students are feeling, and I think I can speak for them when I say they're feeling very supported by many other leaders outside of campus. This year alone, and really because of October 7th, again, unfortunately, the number of meetings that we've held at this Hillel with leaders from the spaces of influence outside or spaces of influence within our broader community, and those people coming to me and saying, I want to hear from students, I want to hear what they've experienced, and I want to be their advocate. The list is quite long, and I want to read through just so you have an idea of the number of times that that's happened, because it really does make them feel not only supported, but it gives them a voice in places like Sacramento and the California Assembly, like the UC Regents meeting, and so forth and so on. Those meetings have included with several members of the UC Regents, the leadership is Rich Lieb, Jay Suris, John Perez, as well as the incoming chair of the Regents, Janet Ridley. We've, of course, had support from Hillel International, the Jewish Federation, the Jewish Community Foundation, as well as many other partner organizations like ADL, AJC, Stand With Us, as was mentioned before. Local politicians, including members of the Legislative Jewish Caucus, Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel, who also happens to serve on our Hillel board, Senators Henry Stern and Assemblymember Matt Haney, who's actually from San Francisco, and many others. As Gabby mentioned, we've had local representation, Assemblymember Rick Zbur, Senator Ben Allen, as well as LA City Council member Katie Yaroslavsky and County Supervisor Lindsay Horvath are just the tip of the iceberg of all the people that have reached out, come to our Hillel to meet with our students, let them know they have their support and they're going to work together with us to ensure that campuses are going to become one day free of anti-Semitism. So with that kind of concluding thought, I want to open it up to question. And I think the number one question that we hear often, for me at least, is how can I help, right? How can people who are not on campus, who don't have the privilege of either working on or being part of a Hillel or a Chabad or otherwise, how can they help? And then I think the second question that's also asked of students is, do you feel safe, right? And sometimes the word safe, is it physically safe? Is it emotionally safe? Is it mentally? What is those words? So I want to turn it over to the students to answer, what can people do to help? And do you feel safe? And I'll let you guys ping pong around on whoever wants to take the questions first.
Yeah, I can take that one. So in regards to how to help, I think just checking in on students and making sure we feel okay. I think for the most part, you know, we're always planning events and we're running around and we're making sure student voices are heard. But I also think it's really important for students to feel, you know, that they're being checked in on and that we're getting that emotional support. So that's really the first thing that comes to mind. And then in terms of safety, I definitely will say that there are some days where Students for Justice in Palestine, you know, they'll host a rally and I don't exactly feel comfortable being on campus, which is when I will definitely go to Hillel and I'll hang out at Hillel. But I think for me, the more pressing concern is the emotional safety, specifically being on student government. I have lost a lot of friends. I've lost a lot of relationships because I'm openly and proudly a Zionist Jew. And so for me, I think it's really just that emotional concern. But for the most part, I do feel safe going on campus. On the physical level, I go to my classes every day. I walk alone to my apartment. And so in that regard, I feel perfectly fine, to be honest.
Anybody else want to chime in? Eli, what can people do to help as you plan for next year, Bruins for Israel? We're thinking about all the programs. You know, I'm going to get a lot of emails. Your parents and your friends are going to want to hear, all right, over the summer, what can we do to help students? What do you have a concrete answer? How do you take that thought?
Yeah, I've really appreciated. We've really appreciated all the support from the community this entire year. It's meant a lot, like especially when we had a rally that so many people from the community came and attended, and people who weren't students, family members, alumni, but also just people who wanted to support us, and it really meant a lot. And there are a lot of ways like that it's really been helpful that we've gotten support from the community. And looking forward, I think I don't know any like concrete or specific things that people can do, but just like being there for us and always being able to support us in that way has been really helpful.
And there's what I'll say to chime in is echoing obviously what the students said, but I think more than the what to do or what concrete to do, I think the biggest thing is to first and foremost, whatever you're hearing, reading, or thinking about, you know, I know it's hard because we have these reactions when we see things, whether it's on social media or the news, that feels so terrible. And sometimes there is an element that is as terrible as it feels, but it is to give the students the benefit of the doubt to learn more, right? There was a question that was posed in the Q&A that I believe that maybe was answered, and that was about what's the university going to do about outside agitators coming in to make the anti-Israel stuff worse? That is a big problem, and I can answer that. But I also want to say there's another side to that coin, which is that there's also a consciousness when outside Jewish groups are trying to help that come in, but don't always make things simpler or sometimes maybe add to the complication for students. And so that's why it's really important to check, whether it's with Hillel or with others that you know, to find out, hey, I saw this post, what's really going on? Is there any way that I can hear what a student thinks? I mean, we're not all going to get a student on the phone, but to find out what's the reaction from the local students been, and to then help develop what the response could be. Almost everything that happened this year on campus, the folks that are on campus, we heard about it far before it hit the news or hit social media. And we were already kind of in reactive mode and whenever we needed to react. And so finding out what we're doing and then amplifying that back to the people you know is likely the best first step. And then to go to the question that was asked, what are those outside agitators, or what's the university doing for those outside agitators? I think it's a big issue. And I think, as I mentioned, that's partly why they established this new division within the university for campus safety. You know, I'll also say that our Hillel is part of a network in the Jewish community called the Community Security Initiative, which is, of course, led by the Jewish Federation. And what I found very fascinating from my role is sometimes I was getting more information about what was happening inside the encampment from the Community Security Initiative than I believe the university was aware of. And so I'm hopeful that in taking campus security very seriously, that they'll learn more about who these groups are that are not only influencing, but in some cases coming to campus. At the same time, UCLA is a public university. Our campus is a public space. And so there are limits to what the university can do to keep the public from outside coming and impacting the campus. There are ordinances. For example, people that are not UCLA ID holders technically aren't allowed to be on campus after 10 p.m. Ironically, I don't mean this to be funny, but it's true. There's a specific camping ordinance where people are not allowed to camp on the UCLA campus, unlike other parts of the city, I guess. So there are things that are in motion. There are policies and laws that are there. And then we're hoping and will be a loud voice to ensure that everything is done to protect all, to really monitor and be careful of all any outside agitators that might be coming on to campus. There was a lot of questions about, protecting the legal rights of students, specifically when it comes to the Office of EDI here at UCLA. Really quickly, what I'll share is that the Office of EDI at UCLA, I'm not going to get into EDI across the board, obviously, there's a lot to be said, but the Office of EDI here at UCLA is actually quite small, and it's basically a legal department. I believe it is also known as, or may even be changed, they may be changing the name to the Office of Civil Rights. And so really the Office of EDI, the main Office of EDI at the university, there are other DEI programs within different academic institutions and so forth, but the main office is really about protecting the legal rights, first and foremost, ironically, of staff and faculty, but then also students. It's about providing legal equity for students. And so that is why we have all of our students file anything that happened there first to create this legal process in the event that there was legal discrimination that happened. Another question that we saw a lot of that I'll turn to students, and maybe just one student will share. There's a question about like a story of a time that you felt excluded. And the reason why I think sharing one story is probably enough is because what I've also told a lot of people this year is, you've probably seen posts on social media, whether it was about the encampment or the pig or other things that were a pretty big deal. But actually the anti-Semitism that exists happens in small ways repeatedly, and it's from some of those exclusions. So if there's somebody I'm looking at Gabby, if there's somebody that's willing to share a story, it's kind of like whatever the story that Gabby will share, has happened a lot to a lot of students.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I have many stories, but the one that kind of sticks out the most is during Black History Month in student government, we had kind of like all the student government council members agree together that they're going to host an event. And the only two people that they excluded were me and the only other Jewish council member. So that was frustrating, and I definitely felt the alienation there. And yeah, so there's just been all of these little incidents, whether it's on student government or different clubs on campus, where Jewish or Zionist students are being excluded. And just as Dan said, it may seem small, it may seem big, but it is happening to many different students, and that's just one very small example.
Yeah, I mean, at student government, culture clubs, even in some classrooms, there's that feeling of either specifically not being included, being told they can't participate, or in some cases just ignored.
Mhm.
And that is something that is unfortunately the repeating behavior that has resulted out of this activism that we know is not only unacceptable, but in some cases likely illegal. And so there's some questions about what are we doing on the legal front? What are we doing to make these more known? Look, we try to communicate to the public and to parents, especially and alumni, everything we're doing. That's a little bit of a challenge for us, especially when things are happening a lot. But I will say that anything that we hear about that we believe a student is discriminated against, and again, sometimes I use the phrase legal discrimination because there's this this catch about Zionism not technically being a protected class at this current moment. We're going to take action, and we're going to help students as best that we can. We have about 5 more minutes left, and we're trying to get to most of the questions. We may stay on a minute or two past the hour mark if you can. One thing that I hear a lot and I see in the questions here is kind of what's going to happen next year, right? And so nobody can predict the future, but there's a few things that I just want to highlight and also answering some of the questions. So the first thing we all know is there will be a new chancellor, there will be a new leader of this university. And so, as I mentioned before, everything that we've talked about, these are things I've said publicly. These are things that I take on the burden. Sometimes I don't always speak for every student. I know that. And I know that not every student agrees with everything I or Hillel does. But I take great responsibility with the burden that I have to try to do what's best for all the students. And so a lot of this is about how I will continue to advocate for these issues with the new leadership, that they need to do more to combat some of the really vile forms of anti-Semitism that comes out of the faculty. and to create an environment that doesn't allow any groups to be marginalized through non-normalization. And so we'll continue to do that with the new leadership. There was a question that was asked about the Campus Climate Initiative. Right around the time of the encampments, the UC system actually, under the leadership of President Michael Drake, actually announced that every UC, there were already 2 of us, there was us and UC Santa Cruz, but we're participating already, but now all the UC schools are part of this Campus Climate Initiative, which will now extend throughout all of next year. And so we're going to be doubling down on not only the education that we're going to provide to as many of the administrators as we can, but to the demands that we make of the university and how they train and how they combat their leadership and their faculty on anti-Semitism. And so there's a lot more that we're doing at the higher levels, and then at the grassroots levels, we're being led by incredible students that are, obviously going to be well aware of everything that happened this past academic year. Kind of unfortunately, but realistically preparing for more anti-Israel activism on our campus and how we'll navigate the programming around that. Maybe 1 or 2 final questions as I look through the list and kind of scroll through here. I think that, there's a question about the strike. That's kind of the current moment. It's like what's happening right now. If you don't know, the graduate students that are employed by the university, usually as TAs, teaching assistants, are part of a workers' union. They went on strike this week. Part of their strike was to suggest that it's an unsafe work environment because of how the university dealt with the encampment. Again, it was actually upheld in the courts. If you're wondering, the UC system did try to prevent the strike, but it was upheld in the courts, and it's impacting classes. In fact, we won't say who, but we had to make a quick last-minute switch of which of our students could be on this panel because of a student's class being affected and the test being moved because the TA wasn't available, and then of course the professor had to deal with it. And so these are just inconveniences and issues that come up time and time again because of all the activism, which again isn't in of itself problematic, but when you know the content and when you know all the other things that come with it, just make it that much more challenging. I think where I'll conclude is with the question that I've seen a few times over here is about, student voices, whether it's in the Daily Bruin or whether it's communicating out into the public. And I think I saw Rachel put this in the chat. It also goes back to the question of what can be done. And I think a lot of what can be done and a lot of what we try to do, because it happens, is to amplify not only what the students are doing, but the voices of the students. Our community is pluralistic, we're diverse. Our Hillel is proud to do everything we can to not only try to be welcoming to every Jewish student that's here, to feel that every Jewish student has a place to be here, but we also try to make space, both literally in the building, but also physically in the communications that we either amplify or promote or highlight, that Jewish students are looking at different issues a little differently. But at the same time, I think what we find is that there's a proudness and a pride that most Jewish students have with their Judaism, and we want to try to amplify not only what they're feeling, but the nuances of their day, of their experience, because it is very different, right? Some of the things that we're facing as a Jewish community is a monolithic movement that's trying to delegitimize and demonize Israel and Zionism. And when we're so pluralistic and diverse, those of us that are kind of in opposition to that, it makes it very challenging because we don't want to try to speak with one voice. And we want Jewish students politically from the left or right, religiously, more observant or not, culturally, more Israeli or not. We want all Jewish students to feel that they have that voice. And it's not only a challenge in general, but it's a challenge when outside the campus, things get simplified. And so I think we do our best to amplify those voices, whether it's in the Daily Bruin or in Ha'am or in the Forward or on social media. And so we ask that you also be that mouthpiece for them as well. There's a lot of questions about how much or how many faculty or how many students are anti-Semitic or are anti-Israel, anti-Zionist in their activism. The how much is somewhat relative. We don't really know the numbers, but I'll just say as I conclude, we have 30,000 plus undergraduate students. Likely we have between 2,500 and 3,000 Jewish students. We have thousands of faculty, administrators, and staff. The number of UCLA members that are openly anti-Semitic is obviously very small. It is. And even the number of maybe Jewish individuals who identify more with the anti-Israel movement than they would with the pro-Israel movement. It's very small. But at the same time, those voices have a big impact. And we're trying to work together to figure out the best way to minimize how it impacts negatively the Jewish students here at UCLA. We could go on. I could go on. I won't. We'll end with that. But really, I just want to thank everybody for joining. For those that were asking, we'll have this recording available for people that specifically asked. We'll send it in an email to people that registered but couldn't attend. And if you know anybody that couldn't join but wanted to hear, we can provide that as well. So I want to thank Tikva, Gabby, Eli, my staff, and everybody who joined us. We got 2 more weeks left. Our seniors are looking forward to graduation, to Jewish graduation, and all the fun activities that come with it. We really appreciate your support, and we're available anytime for any more questions. So with that, I want to thank you all, and we'll conclude our program.